Greetings fellow immortals, welcome to another episode of Talking Tabletop, and today we are delving deep into the Necron Combat Patrol, Canoptek's Guard, one of the most resilient and relentless forces in Warhammer 40,000, and we're going to break down each unit, explain their abilities using core rules, and discuss deployment and synergy tips to ensure your dynasty stands victorious. Let's awaken the tomb and get started. So Canoptek's Guard represents the epitome of Necron warfare. If we look here, we've got resilience, firepower, and the relentless march towards reclaiming their ancient empire. So there's a mix of infantry, melee specialists, and heavy fire support in this combat patrol, and it's going to thrive on durability and attrition against its opponents as well. We can see here there's a range of units from Necron warriors, Scarabs, you've also got a Necron Overlord, and you've got a Canoptek Stalker in there as well. So let's break down these units individually and talk about how to use them effectively. So we start off our unit breakdown of this combat patrol by looking at none other than Overlord Canoptek himself. Now, as Necron Overlord, he's tough, inspiring, and he's armed with some impressive war gear. He's got a Tachyo and arrow, and he also carries the Overlord's blade with this kit. Now, if we look at some of the key mechanics, we talk about the Tachyo and arrow. This is a single shot weapon with strength 16, AP -5, and it does D6 plus 2 damage. So if you were going to use this, use it against a high value target like vehicles, monsters. It's a one shot weapon, so you really need to choose your target wisely. However, I have seen this being used effectively and taken some of the key opponent's units off the table before the combat really even gets started. Good tactic to use. You've also got the Overlord's Blade. Now that is a melee weapon with strength 8, AP -3 and 2 damage. It also has devastating wounds rule, meaning that any unmodified 6s to wound inflict mortal wounds instead of regular damage. Now remember, mortal wounds cannot be blocked, they automatically are inflicted on the target. And obviously he is the leader of the attachment, so he can attach to Necron warriors in this unit and he can boost their resilience and effectiveness as well. So overall, he's quite a strong leader. Now, his general abilities, he has got, in terms of things he can do on the battlefield, he has got one called Overriding Control, and that allows a unit to fall back and still shoot. Now, normally when a unit falls back, it doesn't get to shoot. However, he grants it the ability to do both. He also has another ability called Implacable Resilience, and that subtracts 1 from incoming damage, which then makes him even more dangerous and even tougher when partnered up with his unit as well. Now, when we consider some of the pros and cons of Canoptek, I keep struggling to say that name, sorry guys. In terms of pros, he is very durable. He has got +4 invulnerable save as well, meaning that even with AP added in, he can roll 4+ to save. So, 50-50 chance in terms of taking oncoming damage. He's deadly in melee combat with that mortal wound potential. And he also boosts nearby units' flexibility with the fallback and shoot manoeuvre as well. Now, as with all units in the combat patrols, he does have cons. However, he has a limited mobility in that he can only travel 5 inches. Now that's equivalent or similar to Terminators in the Space Marine box set. Slow moving, but effective when he gets to where he needs to be. And another con is that Tachyo and arrow that he's got is only a one shot, so timing of the use of that is pretty crucial. But overall, Canoptek, as a leader, not a bad unit to have on the table. We then move on to look at the bodyguard unit that we would typically put him with, and again that's optional, you don't have to link him up with that bodyguard unit, you can have him acting solo on the table and them acting solo as well. However, with our Necron warriors, those are our next unit to talk about. The backbone of the dynasty is really the warriors that make it up. They come in 2 loadouts in this box set. You can equip them with Ghost Flayers, or you can equip them with Ghost Reapers. Now, these are different styles of weapon, both pretty effective. One is close range, one is long range. Now, in terms of key mechanics, Ghost Flayers have a rapid fire 1 ability, meaning that if a target is within half its range, then it gets an additional attack. It can fire 2 shots at half range then, so at 12 inches you get 2 shots with the Ghost Flare. It's got a strength 4 and it also has 1 damage. When you then look at the Ghost Reaper in comparison, it's got a shorter range of 12 inches, However, it's got a strength 5 and a -1 AP, which makes it better against more elite infantry and tougher targets. Finally, the flexibility that comes with the Necrons is one of their key, abilities and key skills, and that goes with the whole unit, and that's called Reanimation Protocols. They're very resilient because at the end of each command phase, you roll to bring back models. So for warriors, this can be game-changing, especially when combined with the Overlord's leadership, but we will talk about Reanimation Protocols later in the video. Now, again, we have pros and cons. Now, the pros of the Necron warriors are that they're resilient thanks to those Reanimation Protocols. They have the flexible firepower between the two weapon options, and you can equip a half and half within the unit, and they can be objective holders. Now that is because they're tougher to shift when they're combined with the Overlord. The Overlord is reducing damage incoming, and additionally, those Reanimation Protocols are going to make these warriors more resilient and last longer in combat. If we then look at the cons, again they've got a slow movement of 5. I almost imagine this being like a kind of slow marching zombie army coming towards me. That's what I kind of like to think about, obviously with the living metal and all the things that go with the Necrons. Additionally, the Necron warrior unit does have a limited melee capacity or capability. When we actually look at their weapons, in terms of melee, they simply have close combat weapons, attacks 1, weapon skill 4+, strength 4. So pretty middle of the road for 1 damage, not going to be pumping out a lot of damage on most of the units or elite units that you're going to come up against when dealing with other combat patrols. Next up, we talk about the Scorpek Destroyers. Now, these Scorpek Destroyers are our melee specialists, they're elite units, and they thrive in close combat, getting up close and personal with the enemy and inflicting heavy damage. They carry hyperphase weapons with 4 attacks, weapon skill 3+, strength 7 and -2 AP, additionally inflicting 2 damage, potentially 2 wounds per successful attack. Now, in terms of other aspects of the Scorpek Destroyers, they also have a thing called Plasma Sight. Now, this is one of their abilities. The Plasma Sight is a unit that goes with them, and it can boost their melee damage, giving them devastating wounds for 1 phase. Now, devastating wounds on a 6 to wound, these attacks then deal mortal wounds instead of normal damage. So again, we're dealing with the aspect of getting those wounds actually inflicted on the enemy and making sure they stick. Now, the Plasma Sight is a one-off. It can only be used in 1 phase, and once it's been used, it gets removed from the table. Now, in terms of our pros for our Scorpek Destroyers, they have incredible melee power against tough targets. They are fast for Necrons, as I've mentioned maybe, with a 7-inch move. And the devastating wounds can bypass armour entirely in order to do the damage we need. Now, the cons here are they don't have an invulnerable save, so they rely on toughness and careful positioning. However, when we think back to the Scorpek Destroyer's stat card, they do have toughness 6, which is pretty good for a smaller unit, and they have a saving roll of a 3+. So they are going to be able to save more than 50% of the time, and they have a reasonable toughness to protect them from wounds as well. Now, one of our final units is our Canoptek Scarab Swarms. These are small but mighty. They're fast, they're cheap, and they're excellent for harassing enemy units and just causing problems on the battlefield. Now, in terms of their key abilities, they have their feeder mandibles, which are their main weapon. So if they get into combat, that also has lethal hits, which is pretty good, which means that these hits automatically wound on a 6, and it makes them a threat even to tough targets as well. They can also fly, which is a core rule as well, and that means that they can move over terrain and enemy units, giving them incredible mobility. Now, one thing here that is unusual, that we haven't seen before in any of the videos, is that these Canoptek Scarab Swarms have a core ability called Deadly Demise. Now, that means that they can potentially explode on death and cause mortal wounds on units surrounding. So when they die, or when the unit is destroyed, you roll a d6, and on a 6, each unit within 6 inches will take 1 mortal wound, which is quite effective, you would imagine, especially in combat if combat's been going on for a while. Now, in terms of pros and cons, Canoptek Scarab Swarms are able to move very quickly. They've got a 10-inch movement, which is probably the fastest in this box set. They're great for kind of screening enemy units and bogging them down, stopping them, engaging them in combat, stopping them from moving around the board, and they are cheap and expendable. Now, in terms of the cons here of this unit, they are fragile, they have a toughness of 3, no save against high AP weapons, and they have a limited offensive output really beyond the harassment. Okay, so realistically, this unit is cannon fodder to hold up the enemy and cause problems. Now we move on to our final unit of the box set. Now, this one, I'll be honest, is kind of one of my favourite ones, and this is the Canoptek Doomstalker. Now, this is your heavy fire support. You can see here from the information sheet, it's got 12 wounds, it's got 4 for its objective control as well, it's got a 3+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, a toughness of 8. So it's one of the most resilient units in the box. It is your long-range firepower in that it has its Doomsday Blaster, which is a heavy weapon that has a 48-inch range. Now that is actually the size of the table that you will be playing on for Combat Patrol. So as long as it's got line of sight, that weapon can pretty much hit anything on the table. It's perfect for taking out vehicles and heavy infantry, and if used effectively, can be an absolute game changer in combat. Now, there are a number of key mechanics to go with this unit. The Doomsday Blaster has, a blast ability. It scales in terms of its damage. You've got twin Gauss Flares, a backup weapon with lethal hits. So each time an attack is made, a critical hit automatically wounds the target. Now it fires one shot at 24 inches, and it will fire 2 shots at 12 inches because it's rapid fire characteristic. It's also twin linked, which means you get a reroll of wound rolls. The Canoptek Doomstalker also has Deadly Demise D3, meaning that D3 mortal wounds are inflicted on a 6 when you're actually, if it explodes. It's also a blast weapon, and that means that it makes a number of attacks. Each time you determine how many attacks are made with a blast weapon, you add 1 to the result for every 5 models that were in the target, or the target unit, when you selected it as a target, and you round that down. Blast weapons can never be used to make attacks against a unit that is within engagement range of 1 or more units from the attacking model's army. Additionally, this weapon also has heavy in its profile, and that means that each time an attack is made with such a weapon, if the attacking model's unit remains stationary this turn, it adds another 1 to the attack's hit roll as well. So, pretty dangerous weapon to be on the receiving end of, and hence me saying it can be a game changer for the Combat Patrol. Now, in terms of pros and cons, the pros, long range firepower, and that threatens anything on the board. It's got blast, which means more shots against larger units, and it's durable in that it's got high toughness and it's got that 4+ invulnerable save. So, pretty impressive overall. Now, when we then look at the cons of this unit, it's got a damage profile, so it becomes less effective as it takes damage, and you'll see that on the stat card. And it does need line of sight to be effective. But overall, not actually a lot of cons here in terms of a unit when you look at the bigger picture. So that sums up the units and does the unit breakdown of our Combat Patrol. The next thing we're going to go on to talk about is our faction abilities, and that is the Reanimation Protocol that I've mentioned previously. Now, the heart of the Necron faction is this protocol. Now, at the end of your command phase, you can roll to bring back wounds or even entire models. And this gives the Necrons incredible staying power. They are very resilient, and it is very much a war of attrition the longer a fight goes on. So, for example, if a unit of warriors takes casualties, in your command phase you can then roll a d3 and potentially bring back up to 3 models. This forces your opponent to then kill entire units outright or risk them regenerating. So when you roll the d3, The number that comes back on the D3 is the number of wounds you can then reapply to the model until the model is back up to full strength. So if you had, say, a unit that's lost 2 warriors and you were going to fix their, replace the wounds, the first model that's got any wounds in the unit would have its wounds restored, and any excess spillover would then reanimate one of the units that's been destroyed until such times, and you keep doing this until such times as the unit's either fully regenerated or you're in a position where the unit's been completely wiped out. Now, that is an extremely powerful ability, and if you watch any videos online of Combat Patrol being played, any battle reports, that ability starts to very much cause problems for people as they're going through, the game and all the different aspects of kind of what they come up against, right? The Reanimation Protocols effectively just stops you from wiping the Necrons out. They are very difficult to beat overall because they tend to keep coming back to cause you problems. So if we then talk about the faction-specific stratagems that are present, we can talk about the first one being Mercurial Resilience. Now, Mercurial Resilience, there's a number of things to think about. So when should you use it? And it's worth 1 command point. So during your opponent's shooting or fight phase, and after an enemy targets a Necron unit. The effect of the Mercurial Resilience, which again, I'm struggling to say because it's late, grants a 5+ invulnerable save to the targeted Necron unit for the rest of the phase. Quite handy. So this would be one you would probably use to protect high value units like Scorpec Destroyers or your Overlord from heavy firepower or melee threats. This is especially valuable when facing enemies with high AP weapons, because that invulnerable save will not be affected by the AP damage. So something to really think about if you're planning on using this Combat Patrol. We then have Disruption Fields, again worth 1 command point, and we're getting when to use it during the fight phase before a Necron unit fights. So when you're in the, you're in the saddle, you're in control. This will add 1 to the strength of melee weapons for that unit. So again, another tactical tip here. This is perfect for boosting the melee power of Scorpec Destroyers, your melee specialists, enabling them to wound even tougher targets like vehicles and monsters more reliably. Then the third stratagem is Will of the Overlord, worth 1 command point, used at the start of your command phase. Now the effect here is it increases the objective control characteristic of models in a selected Necron unit by 1 until your next command phase. Now, tactical tip here would be use this to secure objectives or turn the tide in objective control battles, especially with units like Necron Warriors holding key positions, and it can swing mission points in your favour by tipping control in critical turns. Now, an additional thought here, if you've got your Scarab Swarm still on the table, why not use this on them and give them objective control? They are your fastest models, they'll be able to get around the table, and you might be able to then control some objectives and hold some objectives that you may not have had in the past while using that unit. So yeah, just something to think about. So if we then consider the general takeaways that we can get from this box set, one of the pros is that they have exceptional durability through their reanimation protocols. So again, that ability to regenerate wounds or bring back models at the end of the command phase. That makes Necron units difficult to eliminate and forces your opponent to dedicate extra resources to completely wipe out units. We have tough units in there as well in terms of Overlord and Necrotech. His damage reduction through implacable resilience and an invulnerable save are going to make him quite daunting on the battlefield. The Warriors and the Doomstalker are naturally tough as well, making them excellent for holding objectives. We then go, okay, what else have they got? They've got versatile firepower. Now those Necron Warriors have options here in terms of close range or longer range weaponry. The Canoptek Doomstalker as well has a long range heavy weapon capable of targeting vehicles, monsters, large infantry squads with a Doomsday Blaster. And again, if we go back to those Necron Warriors as well, remember as well that the Gauss Reapers are also, have a stronger punch at close range due to their AP damage and things as well. They have a powerful melee threat from the Scorpec Destroyers with their hyperphase weapons and the ability to deal devastating wounds. They are excellent at cutting through those heavily armoured and high wound targets in close combat, so definitely ones you want to be getting into the mix as quickly as you can. They have excellent objective control,
Now again, if we use our tactics and our stratagems correctly, Scarabs could speed across the battlefield, and they have the ability to fly. So they could reach those distant objectives quite quickly and can contest those key points, or harass other units to prevent them getting to them quickly. We also have the Will of the Overlord stratagem, and that has the ability to obviously increase objective control of models, and that's where I'm saying could work with Scarabs. However, it could also make other units harder to displace from objectives. They have a lot of synergistic stratagems as well, like Mercurial Resistance, so that temporary and vulnerable save, Disruption Fields as well, giving a +1 strength in melee. So it allows for some tactical flexibility during critical moments in the battle. If we go with the cons, though, they are slow, right? It's a slow moving army, right? They are Terminators marching, Terminators. Sorry, I'm thinking of Terminators like the robots. They're low mobility, movement 5 inches. Most units in the patrol don't exceed beyond that by much. So yeah, you're going to have to reposition quite effectively to then really be effective. It's not going to work out very well. They have vulnerability to high EP weapons, so while Necrons are tough, they are vulnerable to high strength and high EP attacks that can then bypass armor saves or overwhelm the durability. Scorpion destroyers lack an invulnerable save, making them susceptible to concentrated enemy fire. So squad of Terminators up close, storm bolters, assault cannons, power fists, they're going to be bombarded with attacks there, and potentially in a small unit it's not going to come out well. They do have a limited model count as an army. Now, with only a few units, the patrol can struggle to hold multiple objectives simultaneously. It's not like Space Marines have an ability or a stratagem that allows them to hold the objective and move off of it. Necrons can't do that. They're going to have to stay on that objective to hold it. That's not going to be a case of grab and go. They have to stay, which could cause us problems. But at the same time, the resilience and the durability there will help with that. So each loss is more impactful compared to a higher model count army like the Tyranids. There is an over-reliance on reanimation protocols, so while it is a powerful stratagem or powerful core ability, it's going to require units to survive until the command phase to activate. Units caught out of position could be completely wiped out and won't actually then benefit from the effectiveness of that strategy, or of that core ability, sorry. And finally, the damage output relies pretty heavily on key units. It relies on your Scorpion Destroyers and your Doomstalker. Those are your heavy hitters, and they're going to be your primary damage dealing units. If they're neutralised early, like I said, Scorpion Destroyers, if they were bombarded with a lot of attacks in one turn, they're going to get neutralised quite quickly if you're not planning effectively and protecting them. The rest of the patrol will then struggle to handle heavy threats, especially if those bigger damage dealing units are then put out of commission. So, in summary, lots of pros for this army, but there are also a number of cons there that would need to be considered in order to use it correctly and successfully. Okay. Now, if we then move on and we talk a wee bit more about kind of deployment and synergy, there's a lot of different tips I could give you here in terms of how to use this unit effectively, and I'll try and summarise some of them for you. So if we were thinking about deployment tips, we probably want to be looking a wee bit at kind of, right, where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? So the Overlord and the Warriors deploying together, that's going to give maximum survivability and flexibility. The overriding control allows those warriors to fall back and still shoot, which is pretty useful, pretty powerful, especially when you may want to fall back because they are not going to be strong in melee combat. So that gives you an added bonus there. The Scarab Swarms, again, using them as a screen, using them as objective grabbers, or just using them to, travel across the board very quickly and slow down your opponents by harassing them. Another good deployment tip there. And the Doomstalker, ideally place it in cover, but with clear lines of sight to a number of places on the board. It's your primary range threat. You need to be using it effectively to take out as many opponents as you can so that the rest of your army can mop that up. So in terms of deployment, that's the things to really consider. Now, if we were talking about synergy, there are a lot of different kind of synergies that we could think about. that are going to give us the most bang for our buck. So if we were to think about, the Overlord and the Necron warriors, I mean, the main synergy there is the Overlord's leader ability is going to enhance the survivability. Right? We know that, we've said that, and I've said that a couple of times now. It's going to keep them in the fight even when they fall back, and the use of reanimation protocols with that combination as well is going to continuously regenerate warriors, forcing the opponents to dedicate resources to remove them. So that is just something we want to be doing. Using the stratagem, using Will of the Overlord to boost objective control again is going to ensure that the warriors hold objectives even against larger enemy units. So if the units are getting wiped off the table, you've got your reanimation protocols to regenerate some of them going into your next turn. However, by boosting that objective control as well, even with models getting wiped out, you're going to be able to have higher objective control than, or double the objective control effectively with fewer models present. Another synergy would be Scorpec Destroyers and Plasmacite, which is the item that gives them their lethality and other devastating wounds. Now, the Plasmacite boosts the Destroyers and gives devastating wounds. It turns their attacks into mortal wounds on critical hits. So pair that with Disruption Fields for additional strength boost as well. So that is going to make them, much, much stronger. When they land a hit, they are going to be able to wound on less. The wounds that they then inflict on critical hits as well are devastating wounds. It just makes them deadly, very, very deadly. Activate the Disruption Fields and the Plasmacites buff in the same turn, and that then is going to give you an absolutely devastating charge that can cripple key enemy units. So activate them, charge in, and absolutely wipe the floor with whatever you've charged at. As I said though, Plasmacite then gets removed from the table and you can't use it again. You can't however use Disruption Fields again. If we talk, Scarab Swarms and objective control again, the synergy here is they're fast, they can contest or hold objectives early when you are giving them, the will of the Overlord. And again, use them to harass. They can fly, they can get around freely. That is pretty much the synergy and the deployment tip there. And then when we talk about the Doomstalker, start to kind of synergize that, thinking about target prioritization. Synergy being that the Doomstalker provides long-range firepower. It's going to support your other units by taking out threats that your warriors and destroyers can't reach because they are slow, whereas this Doomstalker can fire over them and wipe out enemy targets before your warriors then go in to mop up what's left over. Keep it protected and use it to focus on those high value targets though, like vehicles and monsters, the things that are going to cause you the biggest problems and the biggest headaches as you go through the game. Now, another wee tip with the stratagem of the use of the Doomstalker would be to use that Mercurial Resilience. That's going to keep your Doomstalker alive when it is targeted by those heavy weapons as well. So when we consider these things, that is the kind of things that are going to really work out in our favour. Now, the final kind of things I want to talk about are just tactical flow in terms of thinking about what do we do when we are starting this fight. So in turn 1, we want to be positioning and screening. Move the warriors into cover or onto objectives. Use the Scarabs to block enemy movement or grab early objectives if we're then using our Will of the Overlord. Keep the Scorpec Destroyers hidden but within striking range for turn 2. In turn 2, you're really engaging the enemy and causing and bringing on the pressure. Charge with those Scorpec Destroyers. Use your Plasmacite. Move in, do the damage. Focus on key enemy units. Use your Overlord and Warriors to hold objectives and apply ranged pressure with their weapons. Fire the Doomstalker at those priority targets as well. Soften them up for the Scorpec Destroyers to come in and you'll wipe them. On turn 3+, hold and grind down. Use the Warriors and Scarabs to control objectives. Continue using animation protocols to regenerate losses. And the Scorpec Destroyers should then be enough to mop up remaining threats over those turns. They don't need to necessarily go and hold objectives because they can be used to go and take out people. Your opponent will likely be after the objective holders. They aren't going to be focusing on the Scorpec Destroyers, but they will realise they're a threat. And even at that, you'll still be racking up victory points as you go. So the opponent has to then make a tricky decision as to what is their priority, stopping the unit or getting those objectives. So, in terms of our summary, Overlord and Warriors, good combination. Scorpec Destroyers with the Plasmacite, again, that with effective stratagems. Brilliant. Scarabs, fast and disruptive, and the Doomstalker, long-range fire, when they support, eliminate threats before they reach your lines. Overall, pretty good box set. I really like this one, and to be honest, I don't own it, but I am very tempted to go out and get it. So, that was our deep dive into Necronic Scarabs, and I finally managed to say it properly without trying to re-record this 20 times. The patrol's all about resilience. It's about attrition. So play smart, position well, and you'll grind your enemies down. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and let me know what dynasty you're playing. Until next time, may the Silent King guide your path.